Now entering the Bitcoin Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by Shapeshift.io, the easiest, fastest, and most secure way to swap your digital assets. Don't run the risk of leaving your funds on a centralized exchange. Visit Shapeshift.io to get started today. And this episode is also sponsored by my patrons on Patreon. We got about 40 at about $700 a month, and so I like to give different examples each episode for why they support. And here's why Colin says he supports. I've been listening to your podcast a lot in the last couple months, and I really love it. It gives me hope and a clear direction humanity can take for the future. I don't think anyone has quite figured out how to present this story, but if anyone is on the right track on figuring it out and sharing the story, it's you. You are so vitally important to the blockchain community, and this is still only the beginning. I want to do my part in making sure you can focus your energy on all the amazing things you do in this space and not worry about food, rent, whatever. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Colin. It's kind of awkward for me to read that, but also makes me feel good and happy. So thank you again, Colin, and fellow listeners, you can support as well. Let's begin the episode. Hello, everyone. My name is Reese Lindmark, and you're listening to another episode of Creating a Humanist Blockchain Future. And in this podcast, we take a systems thinking approach to doing good in the world. And usually, I say, and welcome, blah, 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 to the show. But today, I will actually be interviewing myself. And so it'll be different. And today, we're going to talk about two main things. Just kind of onboard you into who I am because I'm joining the Bitcoin Podcast Network. And then also we'll talk about ETHDenver. So with that, hope you enjoyed the show and our regularly scheduled programming where I interview normal people, not my alter ego, will come back next week. Thanks. Okay, so let's rock and roll and begin. I'm going to try this strange thing where I will ask myself questions and then I will answer them. And there's a small chance that I also do some pitch shifting in post-production, so the question asker might have a lower or higher voice. So we'll see how that works.
Okay, so with that, let's welcome our guest to the show, Reese Prime. Reese Prime, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's great to be here, Reese. Thanks for having me on the show.
Cool, Reese Prime. Well, let's start with kind of a simple question here. Tell us a little bit about, the Bitcoin Podcast Network and why you're joining them.
Yeah, so I'm actually pretty excited to be joining the Bitcoin Podcast Network. I think they are quite value aligned, and I really like some of their other shows on the network, and I also think that they have great banter. This is Corey and Cello and Dee. I was very happy to, after we chat about a bit, to join the network and to be part of a bigger ecosystem. And then just a note for me and what I do at the show is, as I kind of said before, I generally interview blockchain experts. It's kind of a philosophical systems podcast. We talk a lot about culture and values and story and ideology and systems, both the kind of macro systems, like where are we as humanity headed, but also kind of human systems, like how do we as humans operate with each other and within ourselves, and then also kind of software and financial systems. So that's what I usually do. Today is clearly odd that I am being interviewed as Reese Prime, but we do have some great folks coming in this next season, and we'll kick off the season with Robin Hanson next. And then one other note for me is that I am really kind of passionate about the kind of do-good side of things, and so that means that I'm very cognizant of diversity on my show, and for me that especially means gender diversity. So interviewing lots of like women from the crypto space, and there are a lot of really good ones, so I'll be doing that a lot. And the other thing that you'll see with me is that I'm mostly crowdfunded, so I both have this Patreon, which is a peer-to-peer crowdfunding way where people can support me on Patreon, and I also have this thing called StakeTree, which is like a version of Patreon but for Ethereum, where you can stake Ethereum to me. And with that, I also have these kind of rules around myself where after about $4,000 a month, you stop getting happier when you get more money. And so after I get that amount of money, I essentially self-tax myself and give that back to the system. So kind of the diversity front and also the kind of self-taxing front are how I try to do good in the world in addition to the actual content that I'm talking about.
Okay, well, thank you for that intro, Reese Prime. And just to check on one other thing before we dive into ETHDenver, could you tell us about what is your kind of deep why? It sounds like you're into doing good for the world, but tell us more about that. And and I think about the deep why as essentially if you 5 whys yourself for why you do things. Okay, you're on the show. Well, why are you doing the show? Well, why do you do that? Well, why do you do that? Getting to that root level deep why. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so at a high level, you can think of my deep why as this kind of co-evolving, this humanity phase shift to game B, which has a lot of jargon in it, but really means to transition us as society away from the way we currently exist, away from kind of late stage capitalism and towards this game B, towards this world of omni-consideration, win-win, abundance, etc. And that world, it kind of has 2 different pieces to it. The first is it kind of escapes us from a negative world that we might be going towards. So we have the necessity or the need to switch away. And then also the nice thing is that we have the ability to do so. So it's kind of, you can look at it from a negative thing or a positive thing, or like a necessary and sufficient kind of mindset. And on the negative side, I mean, if you look at us as we are today, we have a lot of technology, and that technology is going faster and faster, especially as we have 4 billion networked people with smartphones. With that increased technology, we have increased power, but we need to, as we have that increased power, make sure we have increased responsibility with that power. So this means, right now, we don't really do that much. I mean, we kind of we ignore externalities right now. And what I mean by that is, if the Industrial Revolution, we pretty much ignored, climate change and kind of the environment. And so that means that now, oh God, we have all these issues around climate change, primarily because we ignored those externalities. And so we're going to need to really take into account all these externalities as we have biotech and VR and AR and AI and blockchain and all these things coming up. We need to make sure we're kind of taking the externalities into account. And then another piece of this is we're pretty bad at the whole like making decisions thing as a coherent kind of human organism. And what I mean by that is, our sense making right now has essentially exponentially decreased, where we used to have these trusted sources that would tell us, the truth, and whatever that truth meant, it was kind of a coherent given truth that kind of propelled us forward as a people. And now we have all these different kind of siloed truths that are happening as we have polarization and not our sense making has gone down, and that's bad, especially as our power has gone up. So we need to make sure that as we kind of govern ourselves going forward, that we have better sense making. So this is all say, from a negative perspective, you can imagine us as a self-terminating, on the road towards quote-unquote self-termination as a species. But luckily, right now, we can kind of get ourselves out of that. We have the ability to do so. And it could be so awesome. We're transitioning towards this world of abundance. What I mean by that is there's this great guy, Max Roser, who does world and data, and he has these 6 graphs, and they show how over the last 200 years, on so many different metrics, so many things have gotten so much better. This is like, half of children used to die before the age of 5. Now, like, almost no children die before the age of 5. 200 years ago, almost no one got a good education. Now, lots and lots of people get good educations. So there's in that across 6 different metrics. So that shows that we've done a lot of really good things, and we're moving closer and closer to this world of abundance. And a great example of that is my kind of self-taxing thing, where, wait a second, after $4,000 a month, I can actively self-tax myself, give money back to the system, not accumulate wealth, and it doesn't decrease my happiness. Like, that's crazy. That's awesome. That's such a good example of this world of abundance. So this is to say that towards this plus side, when we think about what this world could look like, it looks like this awesome, abundant, omni-considerate, win-win future where everybody's happy and doing art, and probably some sex too, where we are doing hedonistic pleasures. So this is all to say, we could go down this bad path right now, or we could go down this positive up path, and I think that we can make that up path happen, and that's my deep why, is making sure that up path occurs. And so with that, you'll hear me, today I'll talk about some of this, but, later on you'll hear me talk a lot about, cross-project collaboration and the ETH Commons work that I do, this kind of co-evolution towards shared outcomes, the non-accumulation, non-extraction mindset with, things like the self-imposed income tax, tithing, and crypto pledging, thinking from this win-win, abundant, omni-considerate mindset, thinking about, identity and diversity and historical inertia, and really all of this it's a means to an end. It's a means to our, communal shared outcome together to transition us to game B, to make it through these next 25 years together. And if we do, it'll be awesome. And if we don't, we tried our best. Let's try to build great things and change our mindset and values to kind of push us towards that better future. One way to think about this is we essentially need a virally propagating coin center, but for culture and values. So that's what we're trying to make here. Okay. Does that make sense, Reese?
Yes, Reese Prime, it does make sense. Thank you for that answer. Okay, cool. Let's talk about ETHDenver then. So, you just were a co-organizer for this really big Ethereum hackathon. I guess one of the biggest Ethereum hackathons ever. And let's talk about that. So, could you kind of give me a high-level overview on what ETHDenver was?
Yeah, so ETHDenver, it was a hackathon and workshops and a community gathering, and there were about 1,500 people there, all things considered, all total, and it seems like everyone had a good time, and I had a really good time organizing it. It was this next in this series of kind of ETH Global hackathons, with ETH Waterloo as the first one, and ETHDenver as the second one. And so we emphasized kind of this co-creation mindset where a bunch of different people came there, and we kind of gave them the space in order to do great things, and they did it. And we did that by creating the co-creation space and then really emphasizing, the building piece, aka the hacking, the education piece, aka a bunch of workshops. So we had almost 50 workshops there. And then we also emphasized the community piece, both, getting to know other folks in the community there and doing, building relationships, but also like working with the local community in various ways. So that was kind of the event at a high level.
Cool, that makes sense.
This episode is brought to you by Shapeshift.io, the world's leading trustless digital asset exchange. Quickly swap between dozens of cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, Ether, Dash, Bitcoin Cash, Augur, Golem, and many more. And this is not your typical crypto exchange. You don't need to create an account or share your personal information, and your funds are never stored on Shapeshift. This means that your hard-earned digital wealth is never up for grabs by hackers or other malicious actors. To get started, visit Shapeshift.io, choose the tokens you'd like to swap, input your receiving address, and send your funds. It's that easy.
So could you talk about some of the submissions and things that the hackers did? What were some of your favorite projects? What were some of the prize winners? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so first there were 7 actual winners, like ETHDenver general winners, and they were all awesome. I want to talk about a couple of them that I loved. First was this one called Profiler, which was made by the 0x team and some others, and it was a great way to essentially look at a given smart contract code and then from that determine the gas costs. So that one was just awesome, very usable, also funny because they had a funny Lambo joke in it. So that was one of my top ones. There's this other one called Elkrum, which was this an IoT hardware project, which was awesome, where they essentially made an easy way for people to connect the Ethereum blockchain to hardware. So that one was sweet, and it was a funny thing because they were able to turn a light bulb on stage, which was great. Probably my final favorite one was this one called Key Split, which is a way to take to essentially take your private key to push it to 5 different people in your network, and then if you lose your private key, they can all if you have 3 of those pieces, you can combine them to recreate your private key. And so that was an awesome one that used this great sharing scheme, which was pretty cool, and also just seemed super usable. So those were the actual winners. But in addition to that, I mean, there were just a lot of really good projects there. And I actually had a bunch of people kind of coming up to me afterwards, both at the event and also over email saying, "Ooh, do you know the people from this team? I want to talk to them," blah, blah, blah. So for me, there were a couple top ones on that side of things. First, there was this awesome one called, it was called like Shorties, or like it had the poop emoji as well. And essentially they were allowed for short selling on the Dharma protocol, which I found fascinating because it used this new Ethereum ecosystem, these new Ethereum stacks, which I'm a huge fan of. And this one was specifically using Dharma, which is a lending protocol, 0x, which is an exchange protocol, and then DAI, which is from Maker, which is a stable coin, and so you want to have a stable coin as collateral if you're doing short selling. So it's just a cool sign of those 3 things kind of combining for a given project. And so seeing that was awesome to me because I'm a big fan of these stacks like the Aragon, District 0x, Ethereum stack, Decentraland stack, those things all combining together. I love that stuff, so it was awesome to see that at an actual hackathon. Another thing that I liked was the Brave team was there. They sponsored, but they just wanted to actually come and hack, which was awesome. And they made this, what they called the best Ethereum wallet ever, which was they essentially looked at the ecosystem of wallets and said, hey, we want one to exist, but doesn't currently exist now, that is a local Ethereum wallet with a small attack surface, a front end easy enough for non-technical users to use securely, and hardware wallet support. So it's just a combination of those things that they're like, this doesn't currently exist, let's build it. So they built it, and that was the one that had the most kind of likes and upvotes from the community, which I also loved. The final one was one called Crypto Kicks, which was this high school team that we had there that we kind of mentored, that we had some people mentor throughout. And they essentially used non-fungible tokens to, instead of have crypto kitties, to have these new non-fungible digital collectible sneakers, these Crypto Kicks. So that was the final kind of awesome one there, was this Crypto Kicks project. Yes, that's kind of an overview of some of my favorite hacking submissions that I saw.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Could you kind of dive into the talk side of things in terms of the content that was there and the kinds of content that you liked?
Yep. So the first thing that I want to say here is that these folks from the Integral Center, which is this kind of authentic relating community in Boulder, my friends Jess and Josh, they came down, and during the opening ceremony, the very first thing we did was to have them get on stage and get people to kind of be authentic with each other, be vulnerable with each other. So it wasn't like them on stage talking. Instead, it was them kind of coordinating the audience to chat with each other. And I think that was actually a really, really crucial thing to kind of building relationships and community at the event, was making sure that those folks that those folks kind of facilitated that authentic relating session. So that was probably the most crucial in my mind. My favorite talk that happened during the opening ceremony was by Maiden Global and Rouviere from Shapeshift. And she, it was just so differentiated. And instead of a deep technical talk, even though she is a deeply technical person, she just had these flowers in the background, and she was talking about, how you can kind of connect with your body more and those kinds of things. And I thought it was super powerful, and I heard great feedback from it as well. And it was especially true for me because my 2018 resolution is to kind of be less mental and to be more kind of physical, emotional, and spiritual. So that really resonated with me. The final one was this counterfactual state channels by L4, which was just actually recently implemented by SpankChain. And this one was super well regarded within the technical community. And it's this new kind of state channel. And instead, if you imagine that you're trying to make if you need to do something more complicated than the classic state channel credit card system, where let's say you want to play a game of Go and you making a smart contract for each, instantiating a contract for each kind of new move set and each new game state is too expensive. So what they do is this crazy thing, I'm not sure I totally understand it, but it's this really cool thing where instead of instantiating a contract, both parties in the thing can feel like a contract is instantiated, but don't actually need to. So they can pretend that the contract exists, and can act as though it exists. And then if they need to, they can kind of go down and actually make it exist. But the incentives are such that it doesn't actually need to exist. So I found that like really fascinating, and to have this kind of sub-registry of where these like kind of fake contracts exist, these counterfactual contracts, a really, really cool concept. So I'll be excited to see where that goes. And I guess one of the things to say on the talks perspective is there were talks that we didn't actually produce, but were awesome content that people loved. The first one was we had this art studio, this art kind of makerspace way on the 6th floor upstairs, and this was Status and TrueBit came to us. We're like, hey, could we kind of use this space to do this kind of awesome art thing? It's connected to this awesome Doge Ethereum big project that we're doing. And we want to do this little test at ETHDenver. And we just said, yeah, I mean, we can definitely make that space available for you. We really had no idea what was going to happen. We connected in with some various, Denver maker folks. Brady from District 0x, I knew he played music, so we connected him with them, and it just turned into this awesome space upstairs that was a different kind of building and making. It was more hardware, it was more art, it was more creative, and there's just awesome stuff happened up there. These little mini concerts, a bunch of stuff on the walls, all kinds of crazy stuff. So that was a great bottom-up example of what we kind of wanted from a co-creation perspective. And then another one was these kind of mini working groups that occurred. One around TCRs, token curated registries, and then one around non-fungible tokens. And the NFT one especially was just a hit, it sounds like. I mean, it was a crew of, maybe 30 people from a lot of top projects that just got there and spent, an hour or two, with a whiteboard and worked out, hey, as we're transitioning away from ERC 721, what does it look like to go to 821 or 841, and what do we want all this stuff to look like? And Will from 0x said it was probably the most helpful thing for him at the hackathon. So those are these cool kind of bottom-up things that we didn't create, but we helped co-create because we said, hey, we would love to make space for things like this. So those were some of my favorite kind of talks at ETHDenver.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that the bottom-up stuff is especially interesting, and I will be especially interested to see how that evolved over time with conferences and unconferences and creating space for purely bottom-up things rather than kind of planned beforehand stuff. So could you tell me, sorry, I'm sick if you haven't noticed. Could you tell me a little bit about some of the funny things that occurred at the event?
Yeah, I can talk about that. And I just also want to say that I, too, am sick. So, so some of the funny things that happened, one of them was Andy from MakerDAO. We were having him go up on stage way too late on Friday. It was my bad from a scheduling perspective. It was going to be at we'd already had a 3-hour opening ceremony that went long. It was like midnight 30. He was going to go on stage. He was going to both do a bunch of cool maker stuff and announce this awesome, big $45 million stable fund that they're doing with L4. And he was just so tired. And as he got up there, he's like, oh boy, he'd just flown in, whatever. And luckily, we had the wrong adapter. And so, my MC up there was like, we don't need to make this happen right now. And we were able to push it back to the next day. But it was just like a huge sigh of relief for Andy and a big sigh of relief for all of us. And it was like, okay, we don't need to push this. It's like past midnight. This doesn't need to happen. So that was a good moment. And also, there were similar ones with Ben Siegel from Blockchain for Social Impact and Kyle Samani, where they're like, look, our slot does not really work. I'm sick or I'm tired. Things not working. Like, can we make this? Can we be flexible here? And we were definitely able to be flexible. So that's one thing that I thought was kind of funny. The other thing that I thought was funny was from a beanbag perspective. So we had almost 100 beanbags there. And every time I would walk into the side stage, Luke Duncan from Aragon was always on this very specific beanbag at the very front of the way stage. It was his beanbag. No one else was ever in it, as far as I knew. And he was always there. And then a similar beanbag story was we were searching for Robbie from Blockchain for Social Impact to have him on. He was going to be on a panel. And we were like, where is he? We were kind of searching around. We were looking up. We were whatever. And then we kind of looked down, and he's like actually very close to us, napping on a beanbag. And so I think he had an alarm set or whatever, but we kind of woke him up there and said, yo, you're on this panel. So those beanbags I found funny. Another kind of funny thing that happened here on like kind of the co-creation side was, we were doing judging, and there was, there were 7 different judging groups with 5 judges each and 130 submissions going through that. So there's a lot of stuff happening there that I was mostly attached to, but there was also a bunch of sponsor stuff. The sponsors were judging about 20 prizes as well downstairs. And so, and some of them needed new tables and some of them needed like guidance around what was happening. And it was pretty funny because I essentially at the very beginning just told Jorge from Aragon kind of on what was happening down there and what the process looked like. And then whenever anybody would come to me with a question about that, a sponsor would be like, oh, what should I do? I would say, okay, go downstairs, go to Jorge, and he'll get you set up. And it was funny because that's like wasn't his job. And he said afterwards, it was funny because people would come to him as he was there sitting at his Aragon booth, maybe judging some projects that were there. And people would say, hey, you're supposed to help me. You're the guy who's going to help me. And he was like, what? So he was helpful from a co-creation perspective there. The other kind of funny thing was during the closing ceremony, as I said, there's all these different judges, all these submissions, all these sponsor prizes that had to go kind of all in parallel. And then, we had these last minute changes to some slides. People were trying to bring people outside to inside after they're eating food. And then my parents started walking on stage. And I was like, Mom, Dad, I love you, but you can't be here right now. There's too many people, and I will hug you, and then you need to leave. So that was kind of a funny moment for me as well. So those are some of my kind of funny moments from ETHDenver.
Very funny. What were some of your favorite moments? Not just funny moments.
Well, on the favorite moment side, it's actually kind of funny because as I was writing these down, they were actually all food related, which is cool. The first was a bunch of some girls brought in some Girl Scout cookies, and they brought in like 2 full wagonfuls of these Girl Scout cookies and just sold so many Girl Scout cookies. So that was kind of an awesome moment that I loved on the food side. The other one was late at night on Friday after 0x plus ERC Dex plus Lendroid plus Dharma did a workshop kind of together. It was almost midnight, and we had these oranges, and just bringing them around to the people, offering them to those folks, going upstairs with the oranges, offering them to hackers. That was a moment for me that I really enjoyed because I just like bringing people food, and especially food where everybody's like, ooh, oranges, I'm excited. So that was a nice moment. And then the final food moment was during the after party, which again, there were so many things that were happening at the event that like I wasn't touching at least half the stuff that was happening. And so this food party, I knew there was going to be a food show. I didn't really understand what it was. And I got there, and I had a really long weekend, and it was all tiring and good, but tiring. And I was finally done, and then this food show happened, and I was just like, oh my God. There were these empanadas, there was, meat and cheese, charcuterie, there was this chocolate, it was just like this wide array of super awesome food. So that was one of my kind of final favorite moment there.
Yeah, that sounds delicious and nutritious. What were some things that you kind of failed at?
Well, I mean, lots and lots of things, and there's a big retro doc that I will not share with you, but exists and has lots of learnings. I mean, at a high level, from an organization perspective beforehand, there was lots of issues around pushing people to give me their slide decks and trying to get them in this master slide deck, and that just didn't really make any sense. I'm also sorry to the sponsors that I put in bad slots. These are slots I thought were good, but that was crazy of me. These are like late Friday night, early Saturday morning slots, so that was definitely mistimed on me, and sorry about that. During the opening and closing ceremony, I could have done a much better job personally. I was like the MC through that time, and I could have done a much better job pushing people through from a time perspective. I would go on stage and kind of try to get people to get off stage, but we should have cut the mic or had Oscars music or something like that. And finally, I was a little bit sad about some of the content around, especially certain people that were there who were really experts in their field, but actually weren't on these panels, but kind of should have been. So an example of this is, the scaling panel. It was an awesome panel. We had Igor from POA, Alex Miller from Grid Plus, Sina from TrueBit, Hudson from ETH Foundation. It was like a great panel, but also there, we had David Knott there from Plasma and Omise Go. We had, L4 and Counterfactual there with their state channels. And, we kind of said no to, Sunny from Tendermint because it just didn't quite work from a fitting people in perspective. So that was something that I kind of felt bad about, was making it so that we had these kind of, 4-person panels. And I think that there's a lot of room for kind of co-creation stuff and more decentralized panel stuff happening in the future.
Yeah, it really does sound like you messed up, you idiot. I guess my final question for you on ETHDenver is, what are you thankful for? What kind of gratitude would you like to express?
Yeah, so it's almost endless, the amount of gratitude that I could express here. After Friday, I wrote a tweet that was like, yo, I feel like I thanked 250 people today. And that was true. And honestly, that was a low number. It could have been 500. There were so many people to thank about so many things. So I'll just go through some of them right now, but just to give you a feel about the people that I personally am thankful for at the event. So first, it's got to start with my co-organizers, and these were, a tight. There was a bigger group, but there's also a smaller group of people who were all at the venue for the whole week before, and were working on it for clearly many weeks and months before that. So that's, John Paller is the key one here, the chief steward, and he saw ETHDenver, he had a vision for it, he imbued that vision with some awesome values, and he just, in a very decentralized way, got a bunch of people kind of spun up to start doing it. And he was also kind of our sponsor lead as well, where he said, yo, this is what we're trying to do, this is here's our values, here's what we're looking for, are you in? Either way, it's fine. And I think that he did a really good job of both getting that vision, getting those values imbued, and then getting sponsors to kind of get behind it. So thank you, John. Crucial. The other one here is Justin Moskovitz. So Justin, wow. If Justin, if John was the person with the vision, the values for a lot of this, Justin was just a workhorse, just getting so many things done, and just with such a great domain expertise on events. He had, with DreamHack, a 20,000 person event is one that he'd co-organized before, and he was just ridiculously helpful on everything, super detail oriented, super get done kind of person, and on the first night, actually, before we opened up that first day, he got 0 hours of sleep. So that's kind of crazy. And he also had both of his laptops were stolen after the event when he was cleaning up at 2 a.m. So that's really sad. But Justin was crucial to the event. So thank you, Justin. The third one here that I want to say is Corey. Corey is a kind of an OG in the Colorado blockchain community, and he kind of, joined John Paller's company and was like, okay, in early January, was like, okay, I'm ready to do kind of work for the company. And there was like, oh, wait, ETHDenver, wow, there's a lot to do. And he just got to work on a lot of it. So he did it in this kind of fun Renaissance man kind of way, where, it started with a bunch of kind of coding around like writing some Ruby scripts for duplication work around applications. Then he was doing a ton of applicant filtering and going through folks. He spent, 2 whole days kind of wiring up the whole place with these wireless access points, these WAPs, going on ladders all throughout the building. Then he went back to coding style and, coded up this Colorado coin and got the QR codes to work with all the food trucks. Then he also was at the event itself, was a main person doing the badges on day 1, and then was a crucial MC throughout the event. So he had a lot of different skills and we used all of them, which is great. So thank you, Corey. 3 others here. So Annabelle was came in not really knowing that much about blockchain, and was just kind of a kind of social media Squarespace website lady, and just went deep on all that stuff. And my favorite thing here is, from a Squarespace perspective, she essentially maxed out the amount of headshots that we could put on the site, where at the end it took us like 15 minutes to put on the remaining headshots, because we just had too many. So that was kind of fun. She was also our social media lady, so throughout the event, taking pics, tweeting, live streaming, all of that. She was kind of the lead for a lot of that social media work. So thank you, Annabelle. I want to also give props to Brianna. She's a dev, but she was also leading our diversity initiatives, and is a dev, leading our diversity initiatives, did a ton of local reach out to all kinds of various communities, both from a gender perspective, but also from like an LGBTQ perspective, also a creative perspective, getting art and like music folks in. And she was also our after party steward. So she got great things like the slam poet that we had. She, brought in the Flowbots and actually played trombone with them on stage. So she, again, multifaceted and just like did a lot of help for us on both the diversity side and also on the after party side. So thank you, Brianna. And then the final one here is Mara. And Mara was kind of similar to Corey in that she kind of got on board in January-ish. And if I was churning through emails with sponsors, Mara was doing that same thing, but with everybody else. And so all the emails that came in, all the inbound stuff, so many various spreadsheets, logistics, etc. And then during the event itself, she was just there as just this bright face, always smiling, always having energy, and just a really, like detail-oriented person who got a lot of stuff done in a short amount of time. So thank you, Mara. And then also, so that's kind of what I personally see as like the the key crew that was there beforehand and all throughout the event and before it, and then also an expanded kind of co-organizer community. So this is Colorado blockchain as a whole. Bunch of people there setting up and running so many different things before, both for many years before the event and then also at the event. And I want to give some specific shout outs to my MC crew, Sasha, Shira, Corey, and Kent. And they did a really good job of making sure all the content went really smoothly. The AV crew was awesome. They were people who I had no idea what I was doing from an AV perspective, and they were able to just like walk me through all the various things that need to happen. That was great. All the food folks were awesome. The food trucks, the food show, things are just like we wanted food to be there, and it was great. I also want to give props to the whole volunteer crew, and each of them worked 3 8-hour shifts across the weekend, which was awesome, but they just constantly were there, constantly had this awesome helping mindset. So that was great. I do also want to give some specific shout outs to a couple like subgroups here, and these are, so from the sponsors, again, and I said this at the event, but wow, they made it a free event, which is awesome. And we had so many cool things happening, and that was all pretty much as a result of them and their desire to both be part of this community gathering and also to financially support it. So thank you so much to the sponsors. I want to give a specific shout out to Consensus, but especially Joe Lubin, for making this initial commitment to say, yeah, seems like a great event, I'm going to come speak at it. That was great. I also want to give props to Solarius, DAOstack, Aragon, and Ideas by Nature. They were willing to experiment with me on the kind of bounties and prizes track to do a storytelling prize and a governance prize and a UX prize, which are things that hadn't really been done before. Everything was mostly coding facing. I also want to give props to kind of like the local Colorado government and institutions there. The Denver elections were there and were sponsoring a prize. We had the Colorado Office of Economic Development there, the Colorado Technology Association. So the Colorado kind of general community really kind of supported us in a big way as well, which was great. And then I also want to give props to the Gart family who owns that building. And we essentially told them what we were looking to do, what the event looked like, and they were like, "That sounds awesome." And this is also just super aligned with what we want this to be used for. So we'll give it to you pretty cheaply. So that was a great thing for us, where it was just like, hey, these people are value aligned and they're excited for us to be there. So it felt kind of different than like a classic hotel environment or what have you. And then finally, from a sponsor perspective, I want to give my personal gratitude and thanks to people who'd sponsored me for Ethereum Commons work, for ETH Commons work. And for them, I said, hey, I'll be spending 10 hours a week or something like that, kind of, on ETH Commons. And initially I was kind of spending that, but then as ETHDenver got closer, it was like, oh God, I'm spending most of my time on ETHDenver. So they essentially were sponsoring that from a cost perspective. So that's, that's Giveth, that's Radar Relay, that's District 0x, that's StakeTree. Thank you all for supporting ETH Commons, which ended up being some support for ETHDenver. So that's on the sponsor side. On the hacker side, I want to give a special shout out to Elkram, one of the winning teams who flew to Denver 30 hours from Egypt and then did for 30 hours of coding. So that was awesome and just like a funny little moment during the final presentation. I also want to give specific props here to the ETH Global crew. So this is Liam, Ethan, Kartik, Josh, Jeff, probably someone else that I'm forgetting, sorry. Panashe. And I want to give specific props to Kartik. And Kartik, he was so helpful around judging before the event. And then during the event, super helpful as well. And I just want to give a specific example here where on Saturday, we were chatting about judging logistics. And he was like, look, dude, we got to have, we had all these monitors for judging. And he's like, we got to have adapters. Not everybody's going to have an HDMI. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I don't know, internally as a team, you're thinking that might not be worth it or whatever. And like, we won't be able to get them. And he's like, look, we need these things. We need these adapters. We need these dongles. And he's just like, I'm going to go to Best Buy and buy them. So he went to Best Buy. He drove to Best Buy and bought $800 worth of dongles and adapters. And then as a result of that, he became a Best Buy Rewards member, which was funny. But for me, that was just an awesome example of this can-do attitude from Kartik that was just ridiculously helpful throughout the weekend, both for judging and for opening and closing ceremonies and all the above. So thank you so much, Kartik. And if you're someone who's looking to work with ETH Global, I recommend it. From a speaker perspective, I want to give props to two kind of groups of folks. First is just to Hasib Rabbani from Block Geeks. He was part of the initial crew for the event, and so he got a good amount of workshops like, hey, you're going to do intro to ethers.io, you're going to do intro to Solidity, you're going to do intro to IPFS. And then in addition to that, it's like, oh, you're going to do the Solidity stuff with Hudson, you're going to do IPFS with Leonard from ENS, and you're going to do all that on Friday. And also, by the way, can you on Saturday mentor this kind of crazy group of high schoolers? And he was just down for all of it, was smiling for all of it. Even when he had technical difficulties, this, that, whatever, he was just a real trooper. So thank you so much, Hasib. From the other speaker's perspective, I want to give my gratitude and thanks to my moderator crew. So this was Ryan Selkis, Lee Kuhn, and Evan Van Ness, who were just a group of folks who, when I reached out and said, hey, do you want to moderate? They were like, yeah, this seems great. Seems like a great crew is there. And they were able to kind of work with me in a pretty organic way to hunt down the panelists beforehand, to be flexible as people came on and off of panels, all the above. So thank you to that crew of three for moderating well and for being flexible with me on all that stuff. And then finally, from a judge's perspective, I want to give specific props. We had 35 kind of ETHDenver general judges, but one of them, Zuko from Zcash, was there, and he was there even though he's from Zcash, and this was an ETH event, and he just has this beautiful mindset around helping the community generally. And I'm actually just going to read a quote from him on this for this Medium article that he wrote on why he's advising Tezos. And he says, "Some people think cryptocurrencies, such as Zcash and Tezos, are primarily competitive. They think this for entirely valid reasons involving network externalities. They might turn out to be right, but I think that the network is bigger than any particular cryptocurrency. The network is all cryptocurrencies. In fact, the network is much bigger than that. The network is all of the scientific and economic activity of all of this planet's people. It is urgent and imperative that we leverage and multiply the value of that network, and I'm happy to cooperate with Tezos to do so." Boom. Like, that's awesome. What a great shared outcome perspective and mindset. And so Zuko being there was just this great, like, hey, I'm going to help out the crew. And even though it's an ETH event, I'm happy to help judge. I'm happy to be a positive member of this community. And so thank you so much, Zuko, for judging. My final person I want to thank is my family and close friends. And specifically, I want to thank my brother, John. And we had a long conversation a couple nights beforehand. And he was just very helpful to have him listen and to provide me good questions around, especially the kind of emotional side around getting my mind and body in the right place. And it was great that he was there as just a listener and someone to help me work through kind of my mindset towards the event. So John, thank you so much. Whew, yeah, so that's who I would thank.
Okay, that was a nice list, a little bit long, but thank you for sharing, Reese Prime. With that, now we're just kind of going a little bit, free flowing here. Is there anything else you want to say about ETHDenver?
Let me double check. I don't really think so. I think it was a really fun event. I think that it was a lot of work. I think that I'm happy to help various members of the community with their own events for this kind of work. I think that I'm also excited both maybe for ETHDenver next year, but also to do some more experimental work with other kinds of events like this. I think that it fit my own personality well, both a little bit from a logistics perspective and especially from like a in-the-moment kind of energy perspective. And so I think that I could see myself doing some events like this in the future. And when and if I do, I think that there are going to be two primary things that I push and experiment with. The first is if you imagine all the money flowing through the event, for ETHDenver, we spent a good amount of that money on creating an awesome experience for everybody, which I think was the right call. It made this awesome event and awesome experience for people. But I think that I'm personally interested in having an event that has kind of a crypto pledge self-taxing mindset where let's say you have, just $100,000 going into the event, and of that money, you spend only 25% of it on the experience, on food, on bathrooms, whatever, and you spend the rest of it on, making sure that all the attendees, that all of their flights are carbon neutral and kind of reimbursed in that way, that you spend a lot of the money giving back to the community, that you maybe just give through kind of some of these like effective altruist organizations just directly to poor people around the world or what have you. So I think that's one thing that I'm excited to push on is kind of the amount of money that flows through the event and kind of giving that money back. And the second thing that I'm excited to push on is how unconferencey and how co-creaty we can make it. So we push that a bit at ETHDenver, but you can imagine an event where there aren't really speakers, there aren't really lineups of sponsors and speaking slots and whatever, and that the event is all just kind of bottom-up, self-determined in this awesome way. And so I think that there's a lot of room for experimentation there that I'm excited to work with. So yeah, those are kind of my two final thoughts on ETHDenver.
Cool. Well, with that, Reese, thank you for the interview. And If you are interested in more of this stuff, you can, or if you want to support me, you can go to patreon.com/RhysLindmark. That's patreon.com/RhysLindmark. And you can also go to StakeTree.com/RhysLindmark and support me there. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening, and excited to see you next week with a real guest and not my other personality.
Okay, everybody, goodbye.